My name's Jane, I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Mariska, for agreeing to chair for me. Gosh, it's lovely to be in a meeting of AA. It's especially lovely to be in this meeting. I came to this meeting pretty much every Sunday for 9 months while I was in treatment at various stages of my recovery, and it feels like a real privilege to be able to be here to share my 1 year and to celebrate my 1 year with everyone. And I'm quite nervous, actually, and I didn't think I would be. When I first realised that there was a 1 year share here, when I first came into treatment, I think the ego that used to dominate me was really excited about doing this, and as I've learnt humility, I'm actually quite scared. So, I should do what the book tells me to do, and that's talk about what it was like, what I did, and what it's like now. I won't concentrate too much on the drunkalog of my drinking, because suffice to say, my drinking was bad enough that I ended up in rehab. But I'm of the opinion that I was born an alcoholic, that I was genetically predisposed to, once I picked up a drink, that alcohol would be my way of life. I had a very, very good childhood. I was adopted as a baby and was always told that I was chosen and that I was special, and really I could do no wrong. And I was the centre of my parents' world, and I surrounded myself with people whose worlds I could be the centre of too. And anything that I did was deemed to be amazing, the best ever. Anything that I wanted, I got, and anything that it looked like I wasn't going to get, I could find a way to get. And dishonesty and manipulation worked very well for me from a very early age. And I never had any consequences for my behaviour growing up. I can remember the very earliest time of realising that dishonesty worked for me. I was very young. I could only been about 4 or 5. And I remember my mum never worked because I was so special. She never went back to work after they adopted me. So I spent my time cocooned with her, and I remember her going to the shops, saying she was going to the shops one day. But what she didn't know was, shortly before that, I've decided that I'd take all the money out of her purse and hide it away. I don't know what I was going to do with it, because it wasn't like I could go to the shops on my own, but it seemed like a really good idea for me to have all that money. And we went to the shops, and even now I can remember the kind of fear and panic of knowing that she was going to get to the shops and her purse was going to be empty. And we got to the shops, and she got to the till, and she opened her purse, and there was money in it, because she knew what I'd done. But she didn't tell me off. She just said, "It's okay. If you wanted that money, that's okay, you can have it." And that really cemented for me that it was okay to be dishonest to get what I wanted. I think the first time, drink was never a factor in our house. And again, that cements my belief that it's a hereditary disease, because there is no history of addiction in my family. We were a very small family. There was only me, my mum, and dad, and a couple of aunts and uncles, but there was no history of any sort of addiction in our house. Nobody really drank. We had a drinks trolley which stayed the same few bottles year after year, and occasionally at Christmas somebody might have a sherry, but that was it. My first drink I took when I was about 12 or 13 on a school trip to Rome, and it was an all-girls school. And I remember at the dinner table, because it was quite common for European families to introduce their children to alcohol at quite an early age, and it was quite acceptable for a child to have a glass of wine with dinner. And they'd put a bottle of wine on the table between 4 of us. And 2 of the girls there were like, we're 13, I'm not going to drink. And me and this other girl, and I can remember her face and I can remember her name to this day, she was my first drinking buddy. We drank this bottle of red wine between us. And it was the most revolting, acidy, disgusting drink that I'd ever tasted. And I wanted more, because it did something to me. It kind of lit me up. It took away all my insecurities. It took away my fear of being around other people. It took away, I think, my fear that maybe I wasn't as clever as everybody told me I was, or my family told me I was. And right from that first drink, I was a blackout drinker. We went out every evening to these wonderful places to see the David statue to the Trevi Fountain, and I only have a sketchy recollection of it, and that's at 13. And we carried on this way. And when I went home, my parents thought it was quite exciting and quite modern and continental and so they'd buy alcohol and have it in the house for me as a child. But at that point, I certainly didn't start drinking at that point. I think the first time I realised that my drinking wasn't entirely normal was when I was about 18, 19, and I was living away from home, and I was working in a cab office. And I went out with a friend one lunchtime, and really drinking is a big thing in the UK now, but it wasn't so much when I was growing up, and it's probably just as well. But binge drinking is a fairly recent thing, but people would go out on a Friday night and a Saturday night. You couldn't drink all day because of the licensing laws. And I remember going out on a Wednesday lunchtime with a girl that I worked with and saying, shall we just go for a drink? And her looking horrified. And me thinking, oh, this isn't quite right. This isn't normal behaviour. And I stopped drinking it because that seed was sown that maybe my drinking wasn't normal. The first time I realised I couldn't stop drinking was a long time after that, when I tried to stop and I couldn't. And my husband had been told that he had the start of an ulcer, and it would be a really good idea for him to avoid spicy food and avoid alcohol. And I said, that's fine, I'll do it with you. We'll both go on and we'll both get a bit healthier. And he stopped without any problem, and I couldn't. And it was the first time I'd actually, I think, tried to stop and couldn't stop drinking. Even so, that was still about 7 or 8 years ago. My drinking got very nasty towards the end, very dark. It took away everything from me, really. I couldn't see it at the time, but it took away my self-esteem. It took away all my friends. Because I didn't want people... I ended up, at the end of my drinking, I had no friends whatsoever. Because either people didn't fall in with what I thought they should do, or they got dangerously close to seeing what I was like when I was drinking, and therefore I didn't want them around me either. I would never go out on works nights out, not because I was afraid of the drink, but I was afraid that people would see who I was. And I wanted people to like me. I'm still guilty of that now. I still want people to like me, and I have to accept, I've learnt to accept, that not everybody does. I'm not everybody's cup of tea. But for somebody that wanted to be liked so much, the loneliness that my drinking brought to me was quite extreme. I never saw the damage that I did to my family because I never had what I saw to be consequences. My mantra every time after I drank was, please forgive me, please don't leave me, please forgive me, please don't leave me. Are we all right? I remember saying to my son endlessly, are we okay? Are we okay? Are we okay? And him saying, yeah, Mum, we're fine. But we weren't fine because he wouldn't spend any time with me. And my husband wasn't fine because he could no longer go out and enjoy an evening out with me. He became my guard, I suppose. Our social life dwindled to virtually nothing. My drinking took me to places where I think on some level, I think every night I said I was going to stop drinking, and I truly, truly meant it. I truly believed that something would happen, that I'd wake up in the morning and I wouldn't want to drink anymore. And every night I said, I'm never doing this again. It's the last night, I will never do this. For all the times I've said it, I'm never drinking again. And then I'd wake up in the morning and the obsession and the craving would be there. And by the end of the day, I had no choice. The only choice I had then was what supermarket I went to buy my alcohol, how much I had, whether I had 2 bottles, whether I had 3 bottles. But I think at that time I truly, truly meant every night to give up. And I couldn't understand why somebody of reasonable intelligence and, with a good family situation, apart from my drinking, my husband had a good job, I had a job, I had a home, I had a car, I hadn't lost anything. Why I couldn't just wake up the next day and stop drinking? Because I knew that it wasn't good for me. I knew that, that gradually my health was going. I knew that I had no relationships to speak of. I knew that it wasn't normal. I think the first time I started drinking secretively had been many years before it got really bad. I think it was probably, my son turns 19 next week, and it was when he was a baby, and I started hiding cans of really strong white cider, the stuff that's never seen an apple, the stuff that's purely made up of chemicals, and started hiding that in the bathroom. And, and when he had a bath, I'd have a can of this cider. Because up till then, I'd had a really, really successful career. And that was enough to make me feel good about myself. I worked for a big financial institution, and I had all the praise and all the affirmation and all the stuff that I really liked to make me feel good. But when that was taken away from me, motherhood just wasn't enough for me. And that's when my secretive drinking began. There came a point where my husband had just had enough of my attempts to stop drinking. And towards the end I got violent and I was suicidal. And I got to the point where I thought the world would be so much better place without me in it. And I never saw the selfishness of it. And I made many suicide attempts while I was at the height of my drinking. And eventually it got too much for my family. And my husband and I were on the verge of separating. We'd made the decision, neither of us really deep down wanted to do it, but we knew that there was no way we could carry on as long as we were. After 18 years, I think at the time, or 20 years that we'd known each other, he'd come to the end of his tether, and I don't know how he stuck around that long, to be honest, because if the shoe had been on the other foot, I think I'd have kicked him to the curb long ago. But he did stick around until eventually it got too much, and the impact it was having on our family was too much. My son stopped going to school, and I think a lot of that, he has his own problems. I think, there's something of the addict about him. But I think it was almost easier for him to stay at home with me and see me getting gradually drunk than it was to come home at the end of a school day and find me passed out on the sofa. There was something easier for him to be in the situation rather than have that day of worry about what it was going to be like. And so we rented an apartment for me to move into, and everything was planned for me to move into this apartment. I would sort it out to see my son a couple of times a week. I would still keep my job because I worked for my husband. If I'd have had a normal job, I certainly wouldn't have lasted. I never really lost time for my drinking. I never really had days off because I was hungover. But the effort that I put into that job was minimal. And that's because I worked for my husband and I could get away with it. And he would cover for me because of the acute embarrassment of having an alcoholic partner. But a few days before I was due to move into this apartment, he got a call from his work to say that they wanted to relocate him to Durban, where he'd built up a business. I can look back now and I can join the dots up, and I know that was the first time that I had a higher power. I'm conscious of having a higher power working in my life. Because I drove past that apartment block a little while ago, and I knew in that instant when I saw it, that if he hadn't had that call to move us to this country, I'd be dead now, because I would have moved into that apartment and I would have drunk myself to death. I had this plan that I was going to get clean while I was in this apartment, and that our separation would only be temporary, and that a few months would be enough to sort me out. Because surely didn't I drink because how horrible my husband was, how awful my son was, how desperately lonely I was, and surely being on my own, that would be enough to make me stop drinking. As it happens, my husband and my son moved to Durban in September, and I stayed behind for a few months because we still thought that a little separation would be good. And my grand plan was to stop drinking. And I couldn't do it. Of course I couldn't do it. Now I was not only, now I was on my own. I had a job, but I was on my own, so every hour I wasn't at work, I could drink. And I did drink. And I drank really, really heavily. And I missed a few days off work. I don't really know where the time went. I kind of almost don't remember those 3 months because my drinking had got to the point where the minute I left work, I went to an off license and I drank until I passed out. I never went to sleep at night, I passed out, and I never woke up in the morning, I came round. And it would always be at about 3 o'clock in the morning when the washing machine in my head would be so active that I couldn't go back to sleep. And I'd drift in and out of consciousness until the alarm went off. And there was that point of not wanting to go back to sleep, because if I went back to sleep, then sooner or later it would be morning and I'd have to get up and start the cycle all over again. but also not wanting to stay awake because it was too painful to live inside my head. And after 3 months, when I hadn't stopped drinking, my son flew back to take his driving lessons. I booked him on an intensive driving course because he needed to learn to drive, and it was the best way to do it. And he went for 1 day. It cost us a lot of money. I think it cost about £1,000. It was about 20,000 rand, I think, for him to do this test. And I drove him up there that first morning hungover, and it was about an hour and a half from where we live, and I drove home afterwards and then went to pick him up that evening after drinking for most of the day, and he refused to go back because he was too scared. He was too scared to get in the car with me. And then eventually the time came last December 2014 when I got on the plane to fly to South Africa. And obviously that was going to be my cure. That geographical was going to be the thing that did it for me. You know, when I got here, I really, really blamed my husband for continuing the cycle of my drinking. We moved into our house in Mount Edgecombe, and it was a fabulous house. It's a house beyond my wildest dreams, it really was, and a life beyond my wildest dreams. And really, if I had any willpower, why couldn't I stop drinking? Because now I had a beautiful house, I didn't need to work, I had a maid, I had a gardener, I could do all the things I wanted to do. And I walked into that house, and the first thing I saw was a walk-in fridge, and it was full. And I said to my husband, well, how do you ever expect me to stop drinking when you're doing this to me? When there's alcohol, how do you ever expect me to stop? And I suppose the ability to drink, the isolation, the lack of not working, I had no excuse not to drink, and I certainly didn't try. I dipped into AA a little bit in the UK before I moved over because I knew that, you know, that on some level that I was struggling to do this by myself. But I went to a couple of meetings and all they talked about was God. And all they talked about was their horrible stories. And I remember sitting there thinking, would you just shut up now and let me talk about me? Because obviously I need you to know how bad it is for me. And I need to know what to do. I don't want you to tell me about how horrible it was. I need you to give me the thing that will cure me from drinking. Because I thought it was as simple as that. You know, I went in and I really latched on to, and I saw the 12 steps. And I love the idea of step 9 where you could make amends. And I wanted to do that one first. So in fact, I didn't even try and make him amends myself. I got my husband to text lots of people and say, Jane says she's sorry because she's an alcoholic, she had no choice, and please forgive her. And nobody did. And, you know, and I thought, well, this thing obviously doesn't work, so rather I just don't do it. Rather I just go and drink because this isn't going to work for me. Perhaps I'm not bad enough yet. And I tried AA in South Africa when I first came over. And I remember looking for a meeting once, and I'd been drinking solidly all day and had gone off to find this meeting. And I heard a car tooting, and when I looked up, I was driving the wrong way down a one-way street. You know, how I'm not dead, how I didn't die many, many years ago is only because I've been looked after. I've been looked after long before I knew there was anybody looking after me. I got into a cycle of drinking day and night, and right at the end of, I suppose the thing that almost brought me to my knees, one night, I've been drinking slowly through the day and decided to go out and get a takeaway for the family. And I don't know where my mind went. My disease really took me at this point, I think, because I don't remember, there was no conscious, logical thought process behind what I did. But I went and got a takeaway, and then I drove my car to Umhlanga village, where I'd never drunk before, certainly not on my own, and I parked my car and I went to a bar that I'd never been in before, and I have a vague recollection of drinking with some guys that I'd met there. And the next thing I knew, I was coming out of a blackout in a hotel nearby, and I was being raped by 2 men. And you know, I suppose the sheer pain and of it was enough to bring me out of the blackout. And then, from what I've pieced together later, after that, they dumped me in reception and went off and had a McDonald's, because that's what I was worth. That's what I'd come to. And you know, I know normal people don't do that, and I suppose I can't kind of thought I brought it on myself. I vaguely remember getting back to the house in Mount Edgecombe, and then I spent about 5 days in the spare room with alcohol that I'd hidden, drifting in and out of consciousness, texting my husband in the other room as he tried to piece together what had happened. And I did stop drinking at that point for about 6 days, and the hope that my family had was enormous. My husband said to me, "What is it that's different this time?" And I said, "I don't know, but something's just clicked. The penny's dropped, and I can do it this time." But it didn't last. 6 days afterwards, we had a row over something stupid. I think he walked in the bathroom when I was in the shower or something, and that was it, me off drinking again. But what had happened, and the things that were starting to happen to me, had made me realize that I was in a foreign country now, and I didn't understand how things worked. And if I tried to kill myself for attention, I probably would end up dying. I didn't have that safety, and I didn't want to die, you know. I was too scared to die. You know, it's a cliche, I said I was too scared to live and I was too scared to die. But I really didn't want to die. You know, I wanted something more. I didn't know what that was. But I knew that if I stayed in South Africa, I was going to die. And then one day we decided to make a plan for me to go back to the UK and stay with a friend. And my husband and son would follow on later. They had to come back for a visa. And that friend who'd always said to me, "If it doesn't work out for you in Durban, you can come back to the UK," refused to put me up. And it shut that door on me. And I said, "I don't know what to do. I need to do something. I think I need rehab." And this had been a bit of a common theme for me in the UK, and I'd always said, I think I need to go into treatment. I think I need to be shut away somewhere and to stop drinking. But rehab's really expensive in the UK, and yeah, we could have done it if I'd have been serious about it, but I don't know whether I really was. I kind of wanted it to be easy. I kind of wanted someone to say, my doctor to say, "Yes, here's a rehab, walk into it, you know, we'll book you in for next week," and it'd be lovely and simple. But my husband made a couple of calls and I sent a couple of texts, and that same night I drove up to the house on the hill. And even then, you know, I packed my bag in virtual blackout because I was very drunk at this point, and I sent my husband off to buy me a bottle of wine because this was the last drink I was going to have, and didn't he know that I'm an alcoholic and I must have my last drink. And I have a vague recollection of driving up to the house on the hill. I was in blackout. The house was load shedding at the time, and this skinny Portuguese boy came down the drive to open the gate for me. And some people in the room will know who that was. And I learnt later that he'd been in treatment for about 6 months, I think, at this time. And I thought, what a loser. Imagine having to stay here for that long. He must be really, really bad. Well, I'm not that bad. You know, I think I'd always said I'd come in for 3 months, but I think when I got into treatment, I'd had it in my head that maybe 3 weeks would be enough for me. And I had very strange expectations very unrealistic expectations of what treatment would be like. I certainly thought that I'd be in a room on my own, and that I'd be given lots of nice drugs, and that I'd kind of float around a little bit, a bit like a spa, in a dressing gown, and I'd have lots of counselling and lots of one-to-one sessions with these people that would tell me, that would say, "Oh, poor you, it's so awful. No wonder you drank," and I'd have lots of therapy, and maybe do some painting, and I'd seen there was a pool, so I thought, you know, maybe I'd go to the pool, and I was by the beach, so I'd probably get some diving in while I was there. And I was quite desperately wrong. You know, from the minute I walked into the house on the hill, my obsession and my craving for alcohol left me, and that made me think that actually this was going to be quite easy, that I'd just bide my time out and get that distance between me and alcohol, and then I'd be okay. And then I learnt there was this thing called concern group, and that intrigued me because I was quite eager to see all these awful people I was in treatment with get their comeuppance, and all these bad behaviour that I was seeing, and I was quite excited for my first one. And I saw these people that, you know, I wasn't that bad because surely I didn't do drugs. You know, I wasn't as bad as these people, and I didn't drink aftershave, and I didn't I didn't do all these awful things that I thought alcoholics did, and I thought addicts did. So I thought, I'll be okay. And I'm really ashamed to admit this, but this is an honest program. But I would sit in this room, knowing that 3% of people would make long-term sobriety, and I would look the room and go, no, 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 maybe, no, 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 and I'd get to me and I'd go, I'm okay, obviously. I'm okay. No, 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 no. And I would do that and think, yeah, I'll be okay. And I wonder who's coming with me. Such was my arrogance about my ability to become sober. And then I had my first concern group, and I was devastated. Because all of a sudden I realised that take the alcohol out of the equation, and people didn't like me. And I want to be liked, like I said. I did 3 stints in treatment. My first one was very much, I suppose, resisting changing. Did I resist? I don't know. I knew I had to change, but I didn't know how. But worse than that, I didn't ask how. Or maybe I did ask how, but I didn't stick around to listen to the answer. Because I guess I didn't really want to, because that meant looking at myself and looking at my life and looking at how I treated people all my life. And I didn't want to look at that stuff. And I'll share the significance of me being given a jigsaw for my birthday. There was, towards the end of I'd stayed 3 months and I'd agreed to stay a 4th month. I need to backtrack a little. My husband worked for a company in Umschlanger, and I had all my ducks in a row. I had somebody I thought I would sponsor me, had meetings I would go to, I had this perfect life planned out for myself. And then during my step 5, I asked my question of sponsor, because my husband had been acting really strangely and had been asking questions about when I was leaving the house. And so obviously I thought he was going to take me on holiday to reward me for being so wonderful. And I had it in my head that this was the reason he wanted to know. And I said to my sponsor, why has my husband asked when I'm leaving? Are we going on holiday? And she said, and it's an honest program, you've asked me a direct question, I have to tell you the answer. You're going back to the UK. And it devastated me. It absolutely devastated me. And I did what was to become quite a common pattern for me. I went up to my room, I packed my bag, I shouted, I screamed, I walked down the drive. I couldn't get out, I walked back up the drive. And it sounds funny now, but it really wasn't. It wasn't. I made demands, I need to speak to my husband, I need to do this, I need to get out. And I was told, no, go away and calm down. No, I won't. And so when I was asked to stay a 4th month, or was suggested I stay a 4th month, I kind of wasn't really that willing, because it meant I wouldn't see my family for 3 weeks. And I liked the visit from my family, because every time they came and they told me they were proud of me and how I was changing, and I could sit and tell everybody how awful it was and how badly I was being treated. And my sponsors said this to me, and she's really mean to me, and I didn't think I could last 3 weeks without their company. But I agreed to stay because it had been suggested. And then towards the end of, I think my husband is still around at this point, so it must have been towards the end of my 3rd month. One of the guys in the house decided to make a jigsaw, because obviously everybody knows that in the house that it's kind of like a traditional thing. There's a jigsaw once a year, and I'd seen this guy come into the house in a mess, and I'd seen him get well, and I wasn't getting well, and I was resentful of that, and I was jealous, because he'd done everything that was suggested of him, and he'd had concern groups, and he'd learnt from them, and he'd changed his behaviour. And it wasn't a very busy house at the time. There was only me and one other girl in the house. And we kept each other pretty sick. We had a good excuse to go up to our room all the time to get away from the guys and get away from the rough housing and all the boarding school behaviour. But in truth, what we did up in that room was bitch and moan about how much we hated it here, how much we hated everybody in the house, and how we just couldn't wait to get out. And I was due to go to a Umkamas meeting. And I came out and I looked over in the upstairs room, I looked over at the billiard table. And in true addict fashion, because a little bit's never enough for us. They'd chosen they'd chosen a 4,000 piece puzzle because, having chosen the puzzle, it had to be the biggest, best one. And there were about 10 guys around the billiard table, painstakingly counting the pieces into piles of 10 to make sure that all the pieces were there before they started, which struck me as a bit odd. And what did I do? And I walked down the stairs, and I walked past the billiard table, and I took one of those piles of 10 pieces and I put it in my pocket, and then walked past. And in fact, I think there was only 9 because I dropped one on the floor. And thinking I was really, really funny, and thinking how hilarious this joke would be. And then I got in the bus to Montparnasse, and I realised I was an arsehole. Because all this person had been trying to do, and it wasn't about me picking jigsaw puzzle pieces up, it was about me having this resentment for this person that had decided who wanted to do this thing for the house, and me wanting him to fail. And I went to the meeting at Montparnasse, and I was in an utter mess the whole way there. And I was thinking, I could throw the pieces out the window, but that's really dishonest, and if I do that, then I'm going to drink, so I can't do that. Or maybe I'll hide them, or I'll sneak them back in when I get back. And then somebody else on the bus said something about, oh, did you see them counting the pieces of the puzzle? I nearly stole some. And I went, I did. And people were shocked. And I've shared this story in my meetings in the UK, and people have actually gasped when I've said about the part about picking the pieces up. And I think it was the first time I realised that actually my humour was not what I see as funny. It was not funny. And I went to that meeting and I shared the minute I could about what I'd done and how desperately sorry I was and how I needed to get back to the house and make amends and own my stuff and what I'd done. And it ate away at me for like 2.5 hours. And the minute I got back to the house, I went to look for this guy. Wow, where does the time go? I need to escalate this really quickly. And I went to look for this guy and I couldn't find him, and then somebody said to me, Jane, there were 20 pieces missing. Nobody will ever know. And I didn't own it. And it came to Concerns the next day, and I was in a mess. And not long after that, I RHD'd for the first time. And I drank. And I didn't drink because I stole 10 pieces of a jigsaw. I drank because I hadn't changed my behaviour. And I flew back to the UK very quickly. I flew back to the UK not long after that, and I drank on the plane. And I came back to the house. Oh gosh, the time's gone so quickly. There's so much I want to share. But I suffice to say, my second stint in the house was mainly concerned with me ducking and diving and trying and not getting caught out. And that didn't work for me either. Because after 3 months, I got concerned for some behaviour with one of the guys, and it messed with it blew me, it threw me completely, because I think I'd started to believe my own bullshit that I was getting better, because everybody else, because I hadn't been concerned for about 8 weeks, and you must know that I was concerned at least twice a week for most of my time there. When I wasn't concerned for about 8 weeks, I actually started to believe that I was getting better, but that one concern group really blew me out of the water. And I went on a day out to pick a suitcase up, and my sponsor made me promise to go and not drink. And I'd almost had a physical fight with her earlier in that day to get my car keys off of her. I'd stolen her phone and then realised I couldn't use it because I didn't have a passcode, and I had to give it back to her. And all this nonsense going on in my head, and only as addicts can we laugh at this stuff, but it was complete madness, and stone cold sober, this is what I was like. And I went out and I drank, and I came back to the house, and I think maybe about 6 weeks after that I hit my rock bottom when I realised that I just couldn't live like this anymore. And I gradually learnt to work a program. I say gradually, somebody told me that if I just thought of other people for four days solid, that eventually I would learn that in those 4 days my life would change, and it really did, because constant thought of others is the solution to my problem. And so I left the house after 9 months after my 21-day stay that I thought I needed. And I felt ready to go, and I was really sad to leave. I cried when I left. But I'd learnt something, and the penny had eventually dropped for me. I got back to the UK on a Sunday morning. I went home, I had a shower, and I went to a meeting which has now become my home group. And I've been to that meeting just about every Sunday ever since. And it's nice actually because that meeting will be taking place right now. I did service from the second day I got into the meeting. Second week of the meeting, I did tea and coffee service at that meeting and another meeting. And when I gave up that service position after the suggested 6 months, I now act as GSR for the group, which is the go-between between group and area. And I do 3 or 4 meetings a week, and I mix my meetings up. I have my home group. But the other meetings, I go to meetings where there's strong sobriety. I like to really mix my meetings up because I find that I've grown like that. Because I know how to stay sober for a day, but I need to know how to stay sober for 30 years, and how to stay sober and how to continue working a program. And my life is entirely different to how it was a year ago. I have friends now. I have friends in the fellowship, and I have friends out of the fellowship. I started working about 3 months ago, and I know I have friends that stick around me because they like me, not because they have to love me. And it's all been a real revelation to me. And I will never be able to express the gratitude that I have for my time in the house. It was bloody hard, and I made it hard for myself. But if I hadn't been an alcoholic, I wouldn't have had the experiences that I've had in my life. And I'm actually grateful that I suffer from this disease because of the people that I've met, because of the way of life that I'm learning to live. And I'll never stop growing in this program. And that's good. I don't ever want to stop growing. I don't ever want to get to the point where I think I know it all, because then it's dangerous for me. But there's nowhere else I wanted to be on my 1-year anniversary than here, because I made it hard for myself, and then I learnt to work a program. And there are many people in this room that travel my journey with me, and they will never know how they helped me to get sober. And I guess I've run out of time. Have I? Yes. And Mariska was in treatment with me. Mariska came into treatment with me a couple of days after I came in, and she stayed clean and I didn't. And I think, our friendship has been very special, and the friendship of everybody in these rooms. And thank God that the world is a small place, and I've been able to keep grounded and to keep in touch. And I could go on, me thinking I wouldn't have enough to share to the last 10 minutes, I could go on for another hour, so I shall leave it there. Thank you very much for letting me share.